You ever wonder what you can learn by just looking at the official paperwork? What a week of White House press releases and executive orders actually tells us? Well, we're about to find out. We're going to look at everything they officially put out from September 21st to the 27th to see what their top priorities were, straight from the source. So, yeah, that's the big question we're tackling here. What was the administration really focused on during this one week? And what's cool is we don't have to guess. The documents themselves, they spell out some pretty clear themes. All right, so here's how we're going to do this. First, we'll just do a quick run through of the week, day by day, to get our bearings. Then, we'll pull back and sort all these actions into a few key themes to really understand the bigger story they were trying to tell. Okay, so the week kicked off on the 21st with new immigration rules. Then, Tuesday the 22nd was a really busy day. That's when the big Antifa designation dropped. Midweek, things went global with the president's UN speech, and by Friday the 25th, it was back to domestic security. Plus, that surprise TikTok deal. So that's the play-by-play. Now let's actually unpack what it all means. Okay, so the first major theme that just jumps out from these documents is a laser focus on domestic unrest and law and order. You've got a whole series of memos and orders that lay out a brand new strategy for dealing with what the administration calls organized political violence.
So how'd they start? Well, first things first, they set up the legal groundwork. A presidential memorandum basically gave the Attorney General the green light to officially label any group a domestic terrorist organization, as long as their actions fit the existing legal definition of domestic terrorism.
And they did not wait around to use that new power. Citing what they called a pattern of political violence, the White House rolled out an executive order that very same day, and bam, Antifa was officially designated a domestic terrorist organization. Now, that designation, it wasn't just a one-off thing. No, it was actually just one part of a much bigger three-pronged strategy. Step 1, the FBI leads the investigations. Step 2, the Attorney General prosecutes those cases to the fullest extent of the law. And Step 3, you guessed it, the Treasury Department follows the money to cut off funding. And to cap off this whole focus on law and order, it got local and it got serious. A separate directive told the Attorney General to go for the death penalty in all appropriate cases for federal crimes committed right there in Washington, D.C. Okay, let's pivot. From domestic policy, we're now shifting to the world stage, because the second big theme of the week was all about national sovereignty. And this idea really came to a head during the president's address at the United Nations. The entire speech pretty much boiled down to this one idea, a call to reject the failed approaches of the past. Now, that's the administration's way of framing its big pushback against what it specifically calls destructive globalism. So the speech laid out what they see as a really stark choice. On one side, you've got their vision, national sovereignty, which means controlling borders, national strength, that kind of thing. And on the other side, they paint this picture of so-called destructive globalism, open borders and putting international groups ahead of national interests. And it wasn't just abstract ideas, right? The speech got into some very specific foreign policy points. It called out China and India for buying Russian oil. It drew a hard line on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And wow, it went right after the UN itself, accusing the organization of funding an assault on Western countries. All right, on to theme number 3, and it's a big one we hear a lot about, the economy. The White House was in overdrive this week, pushing out a ton of communications all designed to highlight what they were calling an economic resurgence. The centerpiece of their whole economic message was this one big number, 3.8%. This was the updated GDP growth for the second quarter. And the White House was shouting from the rooftops that this was the fastest growth in almost 2 years, proof, in their eyes, of a massive recovery. But it wasn't just about that one GDP number. No. They pointed to a whole bunch of other data points to back up their story. They highlighted strong consumer spending, more money in people's pockets, a big jump in orders for durable goods, and home sales hitting a 3-year high. Now, beyond just talking about data, the week also brought a massive policy announcement. A new rule went into effect that requires a $100,000 fee for all new H-1B visa petitions. I mean, look at that number. The administration's stated goal here was to curb abuses and protect American workers. And that brings us to our final theme from the week's communications, and it's a classic, a good old-fashioned Washington showdown. With the government funding deadline getting closer and closer, the stage was being set for a huge fight over a potential shutdown. Now, the White House was not being subtle about who they thought was to blame. I mean, check out this statement from one of their press releases. They're basically framing it as Democrats forcing his shutdown to get their wish list of demands. So here's where their strategy got kind of clever. They started digging up old quotes from Democratic leaders to use against them. For example, they brought up this quote from Senator Chuck Schumer, where he argued against shutdowns just a year before. And they didn't stop there. Next, they pulled out this statement from Senator Elizabeth Warren back in 2013, calling shutdown threats a last resort for those who can't otherwise win. You can see the pattern they're building here, right? And just one more for good measure, from Senator Brian Schatz, arguing that shutdowns just don't work and that Americans are the ones who lose. The communication strategy was crystal clear. Use their opponent's own words to frame the current debate. So all of this, the accusations, the old quotes, the framing, it all sets up this incredibly high-stakes political conflict. It really leaves us with the one question that sums up the whole week of positioning. With that government funding deadline right around the corner, who's going to blink first?